None of them did raise it. So why? There's a stigma, particularly in the field of humanities in using AI, and that's not just a problem with the university. By the way, there was a class on AI literacy. I was expecting that they were using AI. So I told my students, I know you are lying. The next week, I did the same question. They all raising hand like this. Because if you don't use AI, you get penalized. But again, that's difference in raising hand, and I was very glad to see you all raising hand proudly today. That's different. That difference really speaks to how, again, we are still coping on the implications of artificial intelligence in our society, and particularly not just in the field of production and making, but even in the field of our relationship with knowledge, how we create new knowledge. The book is all about generating new knowledge. Our, again, the attitude and the mindset in understanding, creating, sharing, right, and maybe even inventing, right, something new. And so, again, I'll share a few insights from, not just from my book, but even from my, again, humanistic understanding of artificial intelligence. I'm Italian, 100% Italian, that's why I speak English with a perfect Italian accent. And I've been teaching for a long while at the University of Bologna. Have you ever been in Bologna, Italy? All right, wonderful. I'm a fellow alma mater scholar here. And so I've been teaching for a long while, well, not that long, actually. This is a medieval representation, the representation of the medieval University of Bologna. You see that nothing changed since then. You still see this as university, it's a perfect university classroom. Same desks, same podium, the professor speaking on top, a couple of students whispering on top right, you see, I think, maybe. And if you pay attention, best students in the first row, like Alexi and others here, and one student who's taking a nap. So I joke with this, nothing changed for centuries. Universities are very conservative institutions to some extent, but even in a positive way. So we need to conserve knowledge. We need to preserve, right, the basics and the foundations on how eventually knowledge, that means creators, that means innovators, entrepreneurs like you, then eventually can create something. And so conserving means also focusing on how we share, disseminate, and create new knowledge. And right at the center, there is the answer to this question. And if you pay attention, we're not the individual with the red hat here. And by the way, speaking of the International Women's Day, even women were admitted at the University of Bologna back in the medieval times. Then it took a while to become professors for women, but definitely it was a very open climate. So here we go, right at the center, a book. The book for centuries has been the most important interface for knowledge. The way to access, Marshall McLuhan used to define a teaching machine. The professor at that time usually used to read aloud all the time, and students transcribing verbatim, word by word, everything that the professor was saying. But again, as a medium, the book, as a teaching machine, the book has been the way for informing our, I'm gonna use a word which is not a bad word, epistemology. The way we know what we know. It's a fundamental question, because if you focus on how do we know what we know, on this question, you can really figure out even how to change and develop new forms of learning, new forms of engagement with intellectual insights, new forms for our intellectual life. And so again, the book has been for a long while, even the manuscript book has been for a long while, an interface for knowledge, a way to create and share a collective intelligence, right? Because we are not intelligent alone. Whatever we know is because someone else told us. It's because we were able to share and preserve the knowledge centuries after centuries. And so we are always, again, a part of a collective intelligence, a collective mind to some extent. Knowledge does not happen in a vacuum, right? We need others, we need our peers. I'll tell you a bit more about this. But for now, again, the book was, again, for centuries representing this approach to our collective intelligence. And you may be familiar with Johannes Gutenberg, a German inventor, an entrepreneur. If you were living in Germany in the mid 15th century, maybe you were like Johannes Gutenberg, that wanted to invent something new. He was an entrepreneur, he was an innovator, a creative mind that, again, wanted to overcome the limits of the written word, the written text. And in fact, he invented in the Western time, in the Western world, the press, the printing press, and a few other inventions that are essentially essential for the technology. And so, Marshall McLuhan from Toronto, a big important scholar who fired the world, the global imagination back in the 70s, essentially defined the printing press as a galaxy. So he called it the Gutenberg galaxy. That it was not just a technology, the printing press was not a technology, was a way to create a new mindset, a new way of thinking, new habits, new worldviews as well. And so the Gutenberg galaxy, according to McLuhan, is the description of our modern age, modern in terms of starting in the mid of 15th century till 20th century, plus or less. And so why this is relevant, I think, to understand AI, artificial intelligence. By the way, the printing press was called ars artificialiter scribendi, like artificial intelligence. The word is Latin, that means the arts of writing by artificial means. Right? This is how they called the printing press at the beginning. I think the same way the printing press was able to allow us to enter the so-called Gutenberg galaxy, today we are finally entering the Alan Turing galaxy. Alan Turing, as you know, as a founding father of artificial intelligence, is just an icon, let's say, for understanding, again, what kind of implications AI brings to the way we know what we know, to our approach to that collective intelligence I was mentioning before, to understand AI as a new interface for knowledge, right? Not just as a book where you read it cover to cover, sometimes only the cover, but you engage with knowledge in a different way. And that's, again, a new mindset, a new attitude, a new approach. That's why I believe that AI is the new printing press. And for those of you who are now, today, innovating, creating, and establishing new ideas and so on, you're really like those that at the beginning of the modern age, with the printing press, really changed our relationship with knowledge. Just to clarify a bit, what we know today as peer review, scientific journals, scientific communities, scientific societies, our approach where knowledge, in order to be disseminated, must be validated, must be controlled, and so on. It's all a product of the printing press. Because of the ability to multiply knowledge and scale up knowledge by publishing books on a large scale, we have changed our relationship with knowledge. Even actually, we left behind the magic, alchemy, and many other ideas that were essentially not meeting the contemporary them and the scientific method and so on. So that revolution that happened thanks to the printing press back in the mid-15th century is now potentially happening with the new galaxy, the new Turing galaxy. And so, because AI is not just a technology, and any technology, again, Marshall McLuhan, when in this book, when he wrote about the Gutenberg galaxy, he said any technology tends to create a new human environment. And I believe this is the way to approach artificial intelligence, again, either from a humanistic perspective or a scientific perspective, that any new technology tends to create a new human environment. It changes everything. It changes the whole ecosystem we live in. That's why I feel we are like fish in the water. Sometimes we are not aware, like fish, in the water we swim in. And that's important. the most brilliant entrepreneurs are those who, well, to some extent, become aware of the world that is within. And so AI, again, is not just a tool, it's not just a service, it's not just a product, is a new human environment, it's a new environment that embraces the entire society. And so this is my fundamental take to understand, again, the impact of AI in society. In my book, I give a definition, so I wanted to play with Latin, and sometimes words help us to think better. And I called it the ars artificialiter cognoscendi, or I explain quickly. Ars, very important for engineering and computer science students. Ars does not mean art. Ars is a Latin rooted into the Greek language, and then used even now in English. That means skills, expertise, knowledge, abilities, discipline, craft, right? So the idea that there is a lot in AI that is human. The real intelligence of artificial intelligence is the human intelligence of those who created it, who deployed it, who developed it first and deployed it then. There is a lot of human intelligence in these systems. So again, the know-how. Artificiality means artificial, that's very similar to English, by artificial means. But what does it mean artificial? Think of any single human invention, anything that you can call artificial is made by human, is humane. Only nature is natural, I mean, it's made by Mother Nature. And even many things that Mother Nature made, we modified. So if you go to the grocery, most of the vegetables have been modified over the course of millennia by our ancestors in order to be more eatable, right? So again, even those natural things are a bit artificial. But artificial is a paradox. It's humane. Artificial means humane, means human-made, made an artifice, made with art, made with skills, made with the human ingenuity and human inventions. That's why, again, I believe, well, final part is conoscere, means knowing. And knowing is, I think, important, even for those like you who are maybe entrepreneurs, launching startups and creating something. Today, knowledge is generative. To generate something is making, is constructionist. To know today means to make, to create. If you create something, you are advancing knowledge. So we are in a phase of human history where, again, just knowing for knowing has diminished, let's say, its impact in society. Today, knowing is making, is very pragmatic to some extent. And that's why, again, think about artificial intelligence as an artifice of human intelligence. We made it. There's a lot of intelligence in artificial intelligence. That's the human intelligence that made it and created it. And that's why, again, I think we need to approach this AI revolution from the bad word, epistemic approach, to know what we know. Well, how do we know what we know? And AI is creating this epistemic shift, epistemic change. This is fundamental. Nothing new in the history of humankind. All technologies, to some extent, redrew, reshaped the maps of knowledge. Any new technology changed our relationship with knowledge. What we know changes when the medium through which we know changes. Since the advent of language and the writing and the printing press and all the even scientific instruments, a telescope or a microscope, right? It changes the way we know. It was not just, okay, a lens that magnifies something. A telescope or a microscope entirely changed our relationship with knowledge. And that applies to all scientific instruments, everything that I call epistemic technologies. So technologies that enhance and improve not just our brute power, but our intellectual power, let's say, again, everything that deals with the intellect. Fundamental, because if every technology changes the way we know what we know, AI follows the same trajectory. So AI must play a role in this fundamental, again, reshaping of our intellectual life. And there are a few fundamental things that happen. AI has been around for a long while, but generally the AI and the improvements in the language processing really made this difference. The idea, what I call a divorce between verbalization and cognition. For the first time in history, we were able to separate and split these two things. All right, so talking, speaking, or verbalizing required cognition, intelligence, human intelligence, one aspect of human intelligence. For the first time in history, we externalized, outsourced the ability to, again, produce language that sounds quite human. That's a fundamental change. Because what is language? Language is what made us human. We became human by language. It was a surviving strategy for us back in the days where 5, 6 species, human species, were in competition to some extent each other, populating this planet. And our species, by language, was able to really overcome, step out of the objective reality. Language gave us the ability to overcome the constraints of here and now. Think of the word tomorrow. Where is tomorrow? It's in the future. Only language can give you the ability to think of tomorrow. That's why the proto-language was all about pointing, right? So, and even in the language today, this, that, this is an indication of something, right? A language then gave us the ability to again step out of the objective reality, here, that, done, and thinking more in a more abstract way. That was a surviving strategy. That's why, again, the ability of AI, generative AI now, language processing to manipulate language, is a fundamental shift in the history of humankind. It cannot be underestimated. Language is the operative system of humankind. It's what made us human. And so it was a shock. To represent this shock, I use a very popular movie, and I bet you watch them all. But essentially, why it was a shock? Because for the first time ever, we met an entity capable of conversing with us. We know there's no intelligence in a language model, yet the model is capable of conversing with us. And that was the first time ever. I mean, if you have dogs, cats, maybe you are tempted to engage in conversation with them, or if you are believers, maybe you've been in dialogue with your deities, supernatural powers, or maybe aliens, who knows? But again, it's not the first time ever that we are capable of, again, we met a kind of entity, again, even if there's no consciousness, there's no intentionality, and so on, but there's an entity there that we made that is capable of conversing. And that is a shock. The second shock is that we have lost the monopoly of human language. That kind of anthropocentric approach collapsed. We are no longer, again, the only entity able to talk. And to some extent, to manipulate language. And the third shock is that we also lost a kind of monopoly in intelligence. And these systems are not intelligent in the way we are intelligent. There's no general intelligence, and these systems do not necessarily think like us. They can do even better than us. They can better than us in many cognitive tasks. And so, again, the shock of having built a machine, technology, that to some extent is mining some, supremacies that used to be, again, only for the humankind. And that's why, again, we are facing this just a position of reactions in terms of how to embrace AI. Again, generally speaking, makers like you, engineers, computer scientists, are taking for granted that this is a wonderful opportunity to create and generate something new. But there is still a lot of concerns right today, even addressing the topic of ethics. My topic is on some epistemic virtues I'm going to tell later. But again, there is still, we are still in this shock. We are still coping with this earthquake that happened in, again, our assumed superiority as intelligent species. And by the way, there are many forms of intelligence in this planet. And again, if you have dogs and pets, you may think that your dog is very intelligent, right? And so we are no longer the most intelligent species. There are many forms of intelligence that work even better than us in other fields. And so we are no longer the most intelligent species in this planet. There probably will never be. And so the shock. But I'll give you a practical idea of this shock. Speaking of language models, because language models are no longer just focused on language. I'll give you an example. I have 4 kids, and I prompted GPT. That was 4, so quite even long ago, based on the development of OpenAI's models. So, what if my kids drop a glass full of water into a marble floor? Okay, so I prompted this. Before prompting ChatGPT, I'm going to prompt you. What happens if I do this? Water spillage.
I know the answer.
You know the answer already.
Glass breaks.
Glass break. Any other thoughts on top there? Okay, let's see. First of all, I can put a typo to confuse it. First of all, it starts saying, well, it depends. It's very mechanical, it's very rational. Yeah, you didn't do that. Glass breakage, done. Water spillage, you say that? Noise. None of you thought of noise. Right? So you see that by manipulating them and clean up and many other things, well, I would get upset with my kids actually, so they didn't put it. But again, the fact that you didn't think of noise is very relevant. So these systems, by, again, just dealing with statistical, probabilistic patterns and regularities based on a huge amount of text and so on, codify the world we live in. And language is a way to codify the world. It's in a way language to abstract our feelings, emotions. If I say, okay, chair, you know what is a chair. But if I say the word love, it's very abstract. And the map, that abstraction of love, in each of you will be likely different. Chair will be pretty much all the same, but love will be different. And so again, language is a way to abstract the world. And so we gave up this. We externalized the ability to abstract in the world. That means understanding the world. But I did another example. I just downloaded from Google that image. Then I uploaded into Gemini, I think that was 2.0 last year. And I just say, what happens if I open my hand? So just a very basic interpretation of a gesture based on a certain context here, a glass and a hand. And you see the answer is quite accurate, right? Well, the spillage, breakage, and everything we say, even with a simple image. That's why we're even going beyond the linguistic capabilities, and multimodality means a better understanding of the world. Now, you may also know that computer scientists like Yan LeCun, Fei Li now are actually building world models. So it may be, I'm not really sure, but it may be that another way to map the world, right? Using more sensors and so on. But we are already there, even with language models. And so, again, from language model into the world understanding. So the idea that these systems are now capable of understanding the world we live in. Not in the same way we understand the world, we don't feel it, but again, even a microscope does not see, but it helps us to see better, to do research, to discover new things. Again, in the same way there's no intelligence in the artificial intelligence, there is no vision in the microscope. But what really matters is what do you do with that thing? How it improves the way you think, you know, and you do research and so on. That's why in my book, I focus on the word generativity, right? To generate, to create, to make. And actually, there are three aspects, the good, the bad, and the ugly of generativity. To generate so easily has some good implications, bad implications, and ugly implications. I'm going to quickly give you some examples. Would you like to start with good, bad, or ugly? Ugly, I feel a majority of ugly, sorry. Okay, let's start with the ugly. Where is Christine Deloitte? Oh, it's you, right? Sorry, I was not sure. Never mind, don't mind. I have this slide before your talk, but this is what I call the Deloitte. Okay, I believe I will never receive a speaking engagement by Deloitte, that's for sure. But again, why this is what the Deloitte effect? Because they did it twice, but it's just an example, like Gutenberg, it's just an iconic idea. This is ugly, because it's not, we cannot blame artificial intelligence. We cannot blame the systems, the models, but we can blame real humans like us who made twice a mistake, the same mistake that this rector from Ghent University did, and she had to withdraw the honorary doctorate, right? But once again, this is ugly, well, pretty much like this. This is a newspaper, and if you wish, I can also create that. This is ugly, or this is ugly too. Speaking of universities, and the professor who was banning AI was actually using AI, and now the student is asking the tuitions back. And so this is ugly because, again, we can blame this not artificial intelligence, but the human stupidity for doing this. But this is what I call, this is another real case, the three-arm problem. Have you seen it? Not yet. It takes a while to see it. It's the three-arm problem. The three-arm problem. So now, this is not an AI-generated image, of course, and then now, you know, these models act way better. It's, you don't see six fingers anymore and so on. But 3 years ago, there was a real campaign for mayor. You see on top, I just, for decency, I removed the name of that candidate that fortunately didn't make it, but it was a real campaign. It was a real campaign for mayor in Toronto. The entire campaign was very biased with underrepresented individuals used to claim the issues in town. So that was horrible, really horrible. But that's how you see that the issues are human once again. And even here, nobody noticed, and they put it on like it was public. They put it public without noticing the third arm. That's why I call it the three-arm problem, like the three-body problem. And I think I found the solution. I think I found the solution to the three-arm problem, which is simply put, as I put it in my book, well, an intelligent use of artificial intelligence. So now, okay, you saw it. What's meaningful here, that I had to prompt on purpose to generate the third arm, because these models do not do this kind of mistakes anymore. But I had to prompt it to actually create a third arm. But AI is really the third arm. It's something that is on top of what we bring to the table, right? Does not replace, but adds something new. And an extension, a prosthesis, as McLuhan put it, or an intellectual partner, as I put it in my book, an epistemic intellectual partner that can really, again, complement what we do. However, speaking of an intelligent use of artificial intelligence, so to avoid that the AI, is AI making us stubborn or stupid and so on? This is a discussion that's going on. There's a lot of research undertaken in the field. Look at this. I call it the two tales, two competing realities. So if you, and I did it, if you compare practical research, empirical research in the field, you can scan the QR code if you want to download all the sources. On one hand, the tale of cognitive atrophy. That means erosion. Now researchers are being very creative. Cognitive debt, cognitive atrophy, cognitive erosion. They always find a new word to describe pretty much the same thing. So, practical, empirical evidence of negative implications of using AI, let's say implications on our intellectual life, generally speaking, okay? Learning, professional life, there is evidence of negative implications. But on the other side, there is evidence, empirical, practical evidence of the cognitive argumentation, and even there, the language is very creative because the scholars tend to use new words to explain things. But there is another series of equal in number empirical, practical research that says quite the opposite. That is, positive impacts, implications in our intellectual life. So, which tale we should believe? Which one is true? How can we cope with this, again, two competing tales of the same story? I believe the solution is very easy to some extent. And both actually sides tell us that the how makes the difference. So the way you embrace AI in your intellectual life, in the workflow, in management, in learning, in university, it's the way you embrace AI, the approach, the attitude, the mindset that will generate erosion, atrophy, or argumentation, enhancement. So once again, we have the responsibility to not just stand on one of these sides. And believe me, this is a big polarization. Remember my student that didn't all raise their hand, there's still a stigma, but everywhere, even in my colleagues at university, professionals, and so on, you see the audience is split in two camps, right? Those who are very, again, enchanted to some extent, and those who are very perplexed. And sometimes you see the polarization, you see the incapability of engaging even in a positive dialogue, right? We have seen this in the entire history of technologies, even when photography popped up, the computer, all technologies, there was always this kind of polarization. But now, beyond the polarization, it's the moment to say, okay, the how makes a difference. The way we embrace the mindset and the attitude makes a big difference. Because, well, the conference on ethics and so on, I wanted to address a few potential issues that are there. I don't want to diminish the very issues. I put a selection here, plenty of choices. You can scan the QR code if you want to dig deeper. But there are many. And none of you is invulnerable. None of us is invulnerable to these potential pitfalls of embracing AI. Again, in any field, generally speaking, either intellectual life, but even the practical life, even with coding nowadays, there's a lot of discussion. Okay, coding is improving. However, there may be some pitfalls, even in those who actually employ AI for coding. The first is the illusion of knowledge. We think we know, we don't know. We exchange, we mistake access to possession. That was even the case with Google, even with libraries. Because you have a big library, you feel you know a lot, or maybe because you know how to find something, you think you know a lot. But again, access does not necessarily mean possession, right? And that's actually a very important part, the Dunning-Kruger effect. But I see this kind of illusion, right? And another aspect of this kind of illusion is the confidence that is not mine, is confidence that AI is bringing to the table. Be honest. When using AI, you feel a lot of confidence, right? So you have a project in mind. Well, now with AI, I can speed and boost it. I have to do something, AI can help me. We feel a lot of confidence. But now you are struggling a bit to read the second word. Competence, right? Why you are struggling? Well, it's upside down, of course, but this is on purpose. Because competence requires struggle. It takes a bit of effort to build competence. And the big mistake here is that we mistake confidence with competence. Confidence is cheap, competence has a cost. That means validation, that means bringing knowledge to the table. And so again, that competence is pricey, but is where our intellectual life really grows. A famous bias is the automation bias, one where when we automate, we tend to delegate cognitive tasks. And the problem is that with a calculator, you can highly delegate. The calculator is deterministic. And so when the tool is deterministic, delegation is blind, right? You don't question. Oh, the calculator may miss. No, calculator is deterministic, right? Unless it's broken. A scientific instrument, a telescope or a microscope, it's deterministic. So there's a high degree of epistemic authority. The authority of the calculator is very high because it's deterministic. We know it's 100% correct. AI, as we know, the way has been built, once we left aside the symbolic AI and we embraced the sub-symbolic AI, eventually we gave up on accuracy, we gave up on deterministic outcomes, and we embraced the most probabilistic outcomes. So we know this probability, but not certainty or accuracy, right? And so even the level of epistemic authority decreases when the system, again, is not deterministic, but it's just probabilistic. And so the main issue here is to mistake automation with judgment. The judgment that is required in again, developing, but for those of you who develop products, even in this kind of biases are essentially embraced by those who use those systems. Just to give an example, well, this is not maybe a math class. This is DeepSeek 8.8 minus 8.11. Very convincing. You're shaking your head, but it takes a bit of knowledge, right, to double check, right? Or maybe you just need a calculator to do that. It's 69, 0.69. But this is very convincing. And there was Sonnet 4, of course, these models are improving, but even Sonnet 4 made the same kind of, again, probabilistic mistake. It's not a mistake, it's probability. This is QN, another open source. And finally, I got the first shot of the correct answer. And that's it. So again, it takes that kind of judgment, okay, in using it. Another, what I call it's called the slope, but I call it the flattening. It's very flattening of language. I mean, maybe most of you do not work in the field of the knowledge economy in terms of using language so much, but this flattening is happening in all industries. Flattening of language means flattening of thinking, because we think by words. Without words, we weren't able even to think. The more words you know, the man you know, the better you can think. New words bring and lead to new thinking. Without words, for those of you who are maybe not English as a first language, you know very well that, again, speaking a different language limits even the way you think. And that's happening by the flattening of language. And so this kind of homogenized approach. There are papers actually showcasing how, you may be familiar, some verbs like embark, to dwell, 12 is the most popular, embark in a journey, intricacies, elevate, transformational. This is a flattening, right? As I don't know if I put a slide, AI is killing mediocrity. Because AI can now reach the same level of mediocrity, the same flattened and standard language. And so if your work falls in the mediocrity, you are killed. Because AI is doing mediocrity very well, or the standard, the average. Even if the standard, the average is very high, again, AI is there to do it. That's why, again, that doesn't just speak to the very usage of language, but in general, the way we think. Testament is another word, testament. You can't imagine how many testaments I received from my students recently. I'm still in good shape. I didn't write a testament. Oh, professor, your work is a testament, a testament. So you see this flattening. And the problem is double. Firstly, the way these models do, sometimes it's intended, it's by design, sometimes they are improving, and so same with the 6 fingers, we don't see 6 fingers anymore in AI generated. Maybe many of these things, that the M dash and so on, they will be fixed. But the problem is not just in the language, but the problem is that people are not able to recognize that their language is slop, is flattened, is average, is mediocrity. Okay? But again, I think the AI scaling mediocrity is a good news, so we can raise the bar, and I'll tell you later. And by the way, it's modifying even the way we speak, believe it or not. There is research analyzing non-scripted speeches, and they found the same patterns, like speaking and say, not only, but also. Right? That's a typical pattern in language. Or, when they say, this is not a conference. This is a place for inspirations.
You're absolutely right.
Oh, absolutely. I'll get to absolutely. But again, it's a wonderful rhetoric formula, by the way, invented by my ancestors, the Roman people back in the days. It's paralipsis. Paralipsis means this is not a chair. It's a place for learning, right? So this is a typical Latin rhetoric that was very popular. It's a shame that you cannot use it anymore. You cannot use it not only, but also, this is not that, it is that, absolutely, and all these things. It's a shame. It's a beautiful language, but here you see the flattening, okay? And I'm not just questioning, okay, how to recognize the AI written content and so on. There's a Wikipedia page, by the way. It's AI written content, I think is the name. You can find, it's the flattening of the way we think. That we accommodate ourselves in the average. The it's okayness, I call it. It's okayness, right? And we think once we reach the it's okayness, we are fine, very good. But AI is killing the it's okayness, the mediocrity. And so, because I'm Italian and Italians always talk about food, this is a real campaign. Because it looks Italian, it's not an Italian product. So next time you go to the grocery, don't get fooled by the Italian flag and all this. Why I use this real campaign? To say the same way about AI, where fluency replaces accuracy. Because it sounds so fluent, well written, we tend to believe that it is accurate. And it's convincing, but not necessarily accurate. It sounds right, and so we assume it is right. There was a big problem in the academia, actually, because to submit a paper to an academic journal, you have to write it very well. I mean, the language barrier was a barrier. And sometimes, again, that was valued. Nowadays, we cannot value anymore language fluency. because again, AI is able to generate it. And but the big mistake, the big potential negative implications here is to again mistake eloquence with real judgment. I'm very convinced of this. And there is a research paper again practically proving how again we get fooled by this fluency. I'll give you quickly an example. This is GPT 5.2. They just released the 5.4 the other day. But again, I say create from scratch. This is generative knowledge. Create from scratch, invent, make up a brand new, plausible concept in astronomy. Okay, but it was again inventing from scratch. And so I got the opacity equal rings in protoplanetary disks. It sounds very convincing. You see the core idea, you see the elaboration, the mechanisms, and everything. All right. So again, if you have expertise in the field, you may recognize it. You may not get fooled. But if your expertise is not at that level, that sounds very convincing, very plausible. And where plausibility is replacing accuracy, judgment. That's the main risk, I think. Okay? Then I put the protoplanetary eco rings, opacity eco rings, into Gemini Pro 3.0, the latest. Now they launched 3.1, I think. So, look, explain what the hell is this protoplanetary opacity eco ring. And I know. Is likely a descriptive term for moving ring like structures. Again, it got fooled just by the fluency of an entirely made up concept. Okay, that's it. This is it. And you see the explanation. And we actually, with Nano Banana, I got even the visual representation of this opacity, eco rings, moving, and so on. It's all convincing. Then another aspect of this convincing ability is the Hannah Arendt, the dictatorship of majority, right? So this is the dictatorship of probability. Because something is more probable, it gets more likely outcome. So minorities, I'm not speaking just about bias here, but minority views do not emerge because they are just less likable, less likely, less probable. Okay, and this is again, frequency replaces correctness because the most frequent thing is the thing that succeeds, right? Instead of maybe the most correct, but it's really tiny in percentage, right? So again, we should be aware. We built the systems. Then well, again, back into the Greek times, Pythia. Pythia was the oracle in the temple of Delphi in Greece. Those oracles, Pythia was not just one character. Back in the days, Pythias, speaking of women today, these were the oracles. They were very smart and intelligent women back in the Greek times that played this role as oracles. And those women, smart, they were just acting like ChatGPT nowadays. So if you had a problem, the oracle will give you the most common sense answer. So oracle, the very origin of the word oracle, comes from, again, as I call it, the authority of common knowledge. People there believed in the oracles, in the Pythias. And whatever the Pythias say, it was intended as authority. And we're falling into the same trap. By the way, for computer science students, in the Delphi temple, in the ancient Greece, the Pythia was just next a snake, which was called Python. So if you are familiar with Python, it comes from the Greek world. And the snake representing, again, another mysterious animal in the mythology, but essentially, if you're familiar with Python, you should thank the Pythias. And again, what I call the authority of knowledge. Things are changing even in our, again, relationship with knowledge retrieval. That is becoming a knowledge already given. So the metaphor, the analogy I use is the grocery versus the restaurant, right? And if you're developing products, even your customers, users, will likely want the restaurant, no longer the grocery. At the grocery, you get the links, you can scroll down, you can select your sources and build your own recipe, right? I told you Italians always talk about food. But on the other hand, it's already given. It's not just again Google AI view, but even now, even the newest GPTs of AI browser or Firefox, Mozilla integrated the same function. Even GPT, the newest one that again gives you a ready-made answer like this. And so this is entirely changing. Again, it's a paradigm shift. And we expect, again, the restaurant approach. For those of you who are not familiar with sycophancy, maybe all of you know what is sycophancy? Sycophancy, right? Sycophancy. I call it the mirror that always smiles. So we created a mirror that always smiles. And this is by design. This is intended by design. This is not the model's behavior. This is intended by design because many companies are building models that are sycophantic to engage, to seek the user, to again create that kind of trust, right? And that's very dangerous because the mirror will not tell you the truth, right? We're always smiling to some extent. I don't know if you saw the recent Anthropic campaign. This is a commercial. This is a smile of sycophancy, the typical, absolutely, right? That's a very serious. Let's see if the audio works. No? Okay. Maybe not. But I don't want to waste time. Oh, mute. Yeah, okay.
I feel like I'm just going in circles. Is my essay making a clear argument?
Absolutely. Your point of view is fresh, well thought out, and rich in research.
I didn't use too many quotes.
Absolutely not. Your quotes help build a thought-provoking piece.
Okay. Then he goes on because essentially then he gets advertising into the answer. But I wanted to point out again the phase of sycophancy is very well represented here. And speaking of sycophancy, for instance, I created an honest gem that tells you the truth. There's no sycophantic. Essentially, I put the famous opacity eco-reads in protoplanetary. Has been thinking for a while because there is a longer prompt, I'm going to share it. The essentially is based on mathematical logic, ablation, abduction, and then thinking. Essentially, I don't know the answer. Opacity is not a recognized technical term. You see the answer, right? That is entirely different. That's the, if you want to use the QR code, or maybe I can share the slides. And speaking of the sycophancy, I got an idea. A gigantic sculpture of a dog shaped from a balloon. I understand this is not an art history class. This is the most famous contemporary artist likely living. And it was famous for creating this kind of sculptures. I put it, and it says, wow, this is a strong idea. This is fantastic. Absolutely. Only Anthropic, I must say, it's obvious for 4.5, it says you are describing something that already exists. Jeff Koons, balloon dog. And now you can recognize it. It's very popular. Again, likely the most popular contemporary artwork, right? And again, I put the same idea into the non-sycophantic AI, again, use the QR code, and you can eventually see your idea as familiar, balloon dog, Jeff Koons, non-sycophantic. okay? Let's go quickly to the good, and then we go to the conclusion. A bit of, again, a good values, a good epistemic virtues, as we call them, in an AI age. That speaks to the first principle of generative knowledge. It takes knowledge to create a new knowledge. Without pre-existing knowledge, without pre-existing expertise and domain knowledge, you won't be able to leverage the power of AI. And so, again, when we master first and then we can delegate. Delegating without the ability to evaluate is very risky. Everyone can generate, but how many can evaluate the actual outcomes, like in the examples we were seeing before? Again, I advocate for the idea of a cognitive partner, third arm in the picture. And for instance, this is for computer science, computer scientist students or computer scientists. Do you know who was Sigmund Papert or Papert? Who was it? Well, firstly, along with Marvin Minsky, he was responsible for destroying the very idea of perceptions. So the perceptions essentially were put aside back in the days, Rosenblatt, because of him. Then eventually, that was the way. So perceptions eventually is the first artificial neuron, right? That eventually makes the very core of machine learning today. But then again, he was responsible for not recognizing, right, the value of perception in the development of early AI systems. But again, when the computer in general became a mass medium, we see the objects to think with. So he created a logo where kids could actually experiment creating things by tinkering, by putting hands on, right? So, and I really see in AI there's a potential, an object to think with, right? And that's the entire history of humankind. We have been always thinking by the tools. Even a pen, a pencil, an abacus, or everything. So all the tools, we've been thinking by tools, we think by tools. This is the entire trajectory of humankind. And so Papert gave us this wonderful idea. I said already about the friction, right? We need a bit of a challenge to learn. If something is too easy, you may lose that sense of, again, friction. Not too much. Once again, the Greek mythologists said, "Apeimatos." That means learning by suffering. Usually, when I say so, my students are a bit concerned. But learning by suffering, we learn, we enjoy when there is a bit of, again, suffering, a bit of friction. And again, the very translation is revelation. So illumination comes from that bit of friction. Do not remove friction from your life. That's my advice. I know that AI helps a lot in removing frictions. And you have to remove that friction that can be removed. But don't remove the friction that makes your brain work. Don't remove the friction that inspires your curiosity, your ingenuity, right? That's important. Remove the right friction, not the friction that you need to grow, okay? AI is a multiplier. I'm running a bit just cautious of time, but again, garbage in, garbage out is a very popular model in computer science. But again, if you bring laziness, you will get laziness back. If you bring expertise, you will get expertise. Whatever you bring to the table will be multiplied. So bring the good stuff in order to multiply the good stuff. I use AI a lot as a compass, right? To find directions. Essentially, you get maybe the next slide, right? You map without necessarily choosing the shortcut. The shortcut, like a hiking in the mountain, right? Hiking, if you get the main hike, all people took it already. But if you want to really explore what's in there, you don't get the shortcut. You get navigate in your own way. So to some extent, again, AI helps mapping the possibilities, but again, you must decide. So there is a way to take that. Very important, to map your path. I see this is a lot on developers, professionals. AI helps a lot, but sometimes we don't trace back the process. We don't, again, we don't have footprint in this case, right? So essentially, and it's a problem when you want to maybe replicate that thing that they really want, right? So, and so you know how you get, you know that you get there, but you don't know how you did it. So this is, I think, important. We call it, we talk about that bias and so on, but echo chambers in AI models, particular language models, are important. So the echo chamber in this case is this. If I ask, why are mental health apps important? My question is biased. I'm assuming that they're important. And so how the model will reply? It will mirror that importance, that bias that I put it, okay? Why are video games addictive? And so, same bias in the question. But the way we do it, we make a question, mirrors our bias. And so we still, if we make a question in such a way, we will fall under the same sycophants, and the same mirror, under the same echo chamber, right? Under the same echo chamber. So we will just navigate our pre-existing assumptions. There's no intellectual growth and no intellectual advancement. Again, if something is fluent, paradoxically has less credibility, so you should be very careful when, again, something looks very fluent to check, double check the credibility, because Italians always speak about food instead of just, again, looking at this, maybe asking ingredients, patterns, and all these things. Big shifts that I talk in my book, from content to context. Content is easy to generate. Context makes a difference. In a workflow, in a company, this is becoming more and more important. From the product to the process. Again, we pay attention to the product, too much attention to the product, and it's the process that eventually makes the difference. Even for your users, the customers, again, where everybody can produce, can create products, the difference in even the user experience will be the process. So I think these are important shifts. And from production to evaluation, because everyone can produce, but how many can evaluate? So the ability to evaluate is becoming more important. AI is raising the bar, one of my models, and it's killing mediocrity, as I told you. I mentioned the principles of generative knowledge. The first one is, again, generative knowledge grows from existing knowledge. It takes knowledge to create knowledge. Without expertise, you will be replaced by AI because it needs expertise to guide, to steer, to find the right direction. And so this is the iterative principle. Second principle is the idea that to generate new knowledge, you need the technologies. Essentially, name one invention in the field of in the history of mankind that did not use a technology. Even language, to some extent, you need if you want to create a philosophical framework, but you need a technology to create something new. And so we think by tools. The collective intelligence is very important. So the idea that we don't think alone, we are not alone. We are all the products of those generations before us, right, that left, and we start where the previous generations left. This kind of lineage, and also knowledge is collective. No invention is a solitary exercise. Right? So I think that applies to many of you. Speaking of intellectual virtues, epistemic curiosity. AI cannot be curious at the moment. AI cannot lie, actually, intentionally. But epistemic curiosity, so the ability to make curiosity a driven force, a driver for understanding is, I believe, a fundamental principle, what I call the inquiry principle, that, again, questions the general questions, the willingness to learn unlearn and relearn. I call the cycle of learnability. Learning how to learn is becoming more important than ever. If you're seeking for a job, you're getting hired not because you learned a lot, but because you are a good learner. And you can learn how to learn, and you can learn quickly. So the learnability, that literally means ability to learn, again, is part of this process that I call generative knowledge. And finally, the sixth principle is the intellectual creativity. Now, I talk to students or professionals in the field of computer science and engineering and so on. Usually, you are not labeled as creative people, right? Who are the creatives? Who are the creative people? Artists, writers, those who work in the creative sectors. This is entirely wrong. This is a misconception. Even a computer scientist who designs an algorithm is a creative person. It takes creativity. It takes what I call intellectual creativity, so that to create something new, to generate something new. So we need to reclaim creativity. And again, creativity is not just in the domain of arts or creative expression. In all fields, it takes creativity to generate something new. And speaking of that, very last words, I'm sure you know the story of Lee Sedol. And I wanted to do it because it's the 10th anniversary, right? Early March, 10 years ago, 2016. Just raise your hand, just I know you know the story of Lee Sedol, right? So, okay, well, it's very well told. But usually it's told only halfway. So the move 37 has been labeled as a creative move by a computer, never seen before, right? Something that was so astonishing. The move 37, again, that no human could ever play that move, right? But the second part of the story that is usually not told is the reaction of Lee Sedol in the fourth game, the only game that Lee Sedol won, actually, because you know, the mind AlphaGo won 4 out of 5 games. And the only game that Lee Sedol won was because they moved 78. This time is Lee Sedol that made a move never seen before. He made a move, again, it was labeled a divine move. So this is not a story of a competition between a computer and a human. It's the story of a computer that helped a human to make a move never seen before, to overcome his limits, to overcome the boundaries of his own creativity. A millennia history of Go that, again, thanks to the challenge, Lee Sedol was able to overcome. That's the most beautiful part of the story. The second part of the story usually is not told. This is a story of the human ingenuity that goes beyond its limits, thanks to a computer. Another part of the story, then eventually Lee Sedol apologized. This is typical of the South Korean culture, and he said, I was too weak to overcome it. This is where Lee Sedol, I believe, is wrong. We don't have to apologize. If AI is better than us on many cognitive tasks, finding incredible moves, and as you know, AlphaGo brought to AlphaZero and AlphaZero to AlphaFold, so an incredible advancement in the folding of problems. But again, there is nothing to blame on us. It's totally okay. We are unsurmountable. We are not unsurmountable. And that's okay. We are not perfect as humans. Machines can do a lot that we do. If we overcome that kind of anthropocentric pride, we can say again that we're not perfect as humans. That's totally okay. But we have the ability, again, to guide this alliance with AI, again, not a competition, an alliance between computer and machine, to overcome our boundaries, to overcome our limits, to do another move never seen before. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paolo. So I think while we're doing the draw, we can take just one question, but maybe not too much.
Yeah, okay.
And the Mentimeter that was provided to you, you can put your names in, so we can do a draw for the book. The Mentimeter, the same Mentimeter.
I'll put the QR code on the
Yeah.
on the board. Okay, so on this one, enter your names and we'll do the draw for the book. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions, we have time for one. Yes. Would you be able to share the slides afterwards?
Sure, absolutely. I'll share the slides, and maybe they can circulate. And then I do have a Substack where I share most of my insights, glimpses from the book. The Substack is called The Generative Thinkers. It's the last chapter of the book, actually, because I believe that, again, so as a thinker, so we should focus on how to generate something new. But the generation, the generativity is key. And so if you want to become, I do actually have a piece, the generative thinker. Okay, so you have a question. Okay, you can grab a pin already. Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you. Like I'm actually a statistics major with my minors in sociology and international development. So like kind of what you said at the start, like I do find that like in both spaces, like students' reaction to AI and like professors is like very different. Like I guess like how would you like because I've had like experiences where some of my professors are like very like anti-AI, like how would you like deal with that? Like if we're like very like binary towards like their attitudes.
Again, I hope you've heard. So the stigma against AI that is still, again, not just in the university, even in private or public companies, it is still the stigma. If you use AI to discover a new drug against the cancer, it's great. But if you use AI maybe to do something else, it's bad, it's cheating, and so on. It's still the stigma. At the core of this stigma is trust. It's trust. If we openly speak about it, I think Olivia Petrovic is sure. There's a probabilistic
is taking over.
Again, trust. That applies to companies. I know workers who undertake their daily job without disclosing that they're using it for many reasons. And so that really arms the mutual trust that is at the core of a public institution like a university, and even at the core of a company culture, right? A mutual trust, a mutual respect, transparency. And so my advice is to make it clear, to discuss more in the debate with the professor, with the other students. You can mention the example that I was asking, raising hand, and not students were, but again, the very core is trust. The more we talk, the more we open, the more transparency, the better we can embrace and intelligently deal with, again, this kind of stigma that is still around. Absolutely. Trust is key. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
How's the George going?
Just removing Oliver.
Double check. Olivia. Can you put it alphabetical order? See, Olivia. Olivia took very seriously the idea that the probabilistic, the dictatorship of probability.
Okay, Oliver's still hard. Yeah.
If you put my name in, maybe I can take it back.
Okay, I think we're good now.
Very good.
Okay.
Oh, there's two Tianachi.
Oh. Okay.
Ooh, real time. I use the same tool actually.
All the-
Okay, here she is. All right. This is the computer science fan. All right, come on, Avery. Congratulations, it's a privilege. All right, thank you very much. Take a photo.
We'll add that after.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Meanwhile, our last talk is Rama Ravan, 30 minutes on responsible AI. And if anyone wants to grab a drink, we have drinks at the top right, top left. And then we're doing awards right after, so hold tight. And yeah, enjoy.
I'll introduce him Before Rama starts, let me just introduce him very briefly. He's a PhD candidate in U of T Faculty of Information and a graduate fellow at the Data Science Institute at U of T, researching how AI fractioners and LLMs reason on their ambiguity and AI safety. He's gonna use a laptop, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we can just here. This way.
Oh. At the end of Oh.
Oh my god, like you've been here all time.
Oh.
That was kind of.
Actually, we'll do something on my computer.
Yeah, so I have some.
Are you part of the SRI community?
Yeah, I was like, I realized we talked about this yesterday. Oh, I got this. Thank you. No. I'm sorry. No. See, I think.
Take All right. Thank you.
So my logos, I was like, when I saw the first one, I'm writing an article on AI psychosis and part. It's like 4 hours. That's how I was like, that's when I wrote an article. Yeah. The movie analysis of this. I was like,
And those commercials from Anthropic are so funny. This is serious. Right? This is serious. I like the blonde woman. The one in the classroom is perfect.
yeah. Thank you so much. That was great.
All right. Let me pack my stuff.
But we studied the same thing in school.
I think it's fine.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Actually, yeah, I was working on that.
The part two. Yeah, part two. It's like I'm still like even when I put the pixels onto the screen, they just don't show up. Like I know it's just bugging. It's really not the screen.
Good thing from it's so wonderful.
This will look at where honestly, you know, you go right 15 times and then go down, then you right back, and then you go down, and you do that, but it just doesn't. It goes down.
Yeah, I know it's hard to say for mom. That's what kind of product I'm so it's a great thing to know. I really think about pressure, like so many things.
That's great.
Because I said that. Like a process. That's the difference, right? That's what makes yeah, and it's
I'm like,
this I don't I didn't see that. Yeah, I don't want to see windows always, but sometimes.
What is that okay? Yes. Okay, everyone, we're gonna start our last talk now, and then we'll continue talking after the award ceremony. We'll have time to chat if everyone stays. So, welcome.
Hey everyone, it's nice to be here, and thanks for all the exciting talks and panels. So today I'll quickly talk about, I know it's the last session, you must be exhausted, so I'll keep it quick. So I'm going to talk about a few, based on papers on responsible AI in practice. So just a quick thing about me, like I was a data scientist and AI developer before starting my PhD. I'm now a PhD student, PhD candidate at the Faculty of Information here. And before that, I worked with different practitioners across different disciplines, and I've seen firsthand how they apply AI more responsibly. So I will talk a bit about that too. And my current PhD focuses on like how to advance responsible AI in a more rigorous way in practice. So this talk will be based on two papers that we recently published at a conference called CHI, it stands for Computer Human Interaction. It's based on interviewing qualitative studies. So we didn't propose, so this is a qualitative and theoretical studies, which computer science is slowly getting into. And yeah, so we talk a lot about how they do responsible AI in practice. So yeah, so start with two motivations for doing these kinds of work. One, for those who are unfamiliar with the term responsible AI, it refers to a lot of things. It refers to a variety of strategies, techniques that any AI practitioners do to make sure that the AI do not cause any harm. So recently with language models, the term AI safety is being largely used, but before that it was all responsible AI. If you see Google research or any other top organizations, research areas of focus, you'll see responsible AI as one important category. But still, the term is very nebulous, like it could mean a lot of things. And the second motivation was that there are several works, academic works, that look at how different practitioners look at like how different practitioners approach AI or deploy AI in practice. Not many have focused on. There are a lot of works, but not many have focused particularly on technical practitioners. Like data scientists or computer scientists or engineers who carry out these so many like. These practitioners' activities, their daily processes, involves a lot of subtle assumptions and nuances that often go overlooked, or they're often is taken as given or granted, like something that not many people look deep into. So these two factors motivated us to see what does their methodology look like what do practitioners do, technical practitioners do for responsible AI. So I'll just quickly go over this. Like I'm not going to go over the table here, but the idea is that we interviewed a lot of practitioners from across the world, from different domains like agriculture, human resource, and so many different domains. So the way these studies go is that perhaps it's not very a typical subject in computer science, but again, this is a study in HCI or human-computer interaction, where we study how humans interact with computers and see how we can make those interactions experiences much better. So one lens that we took here is that by interviewing these practitioners, we looked at all these interview data, the findings that we gathered, the insights that they shared through a theoretical lens. And this lens, the lens that we used was from political sciences. There are so many theories of justice or fairness that talks about. So justice and fairness is related to responsible AI because by making AI responsible, we want it to be more fair or just, right? So we took these theories from different literature in political science and saw how we can study practitioners' methodology. Now, I can't do any justice to these justice theories by explaining what they are in 20 seconds, but just to point out some quick overview of what they are. So, ideal theory focuses on coming up with some ideals, some goals, and moving towards that. Whereas on the other hand, non-ideal theory focuses on diagnosing the imperfections, the challenges of the environment, and studying the causal chain of actions, like what happens from the problems to. It's similar to how a doctor diagnoses your problem, right? Doctor doesn't say, okay, this is what healthy individuals should look like. Now let's see how healthy or unhealthy you are, right? So instead, doctors, they diagnose your problem. They ask what's happening to you and so on. So that's the approach that non-ideal theory of justice take. So we use this lens to see how practitioners, machine learning practitioners or AI practitioners in general, they approach responsible AI. What are their constraints look like, and what are their assumptions look like, and so on. So most of these, I'll just quickly show how it looked like. Yeah. So one thing that we found was that most of the assumptions and choices in these routine steps, they are often overlooked. So the typical process looks like this: like apply AI techniques, build a system, and get the system out, and then see, and then pursue afterwards like these responsible ML inquiries. So look at this quote from one of the lead data scientists. So in business, you always think in terms of good, bad, and ugly. Like it's about reducing your area of concern in such a way that you are able to deliver value, even if it's 30% or 40%. If it's good if it's still better than the current processes, right? And most of these processes also involve like adhering to different guidelines, different worksheets, different principles, etc. Either the organizational principles or the state government's principles and so on. But these approaches are often very done very ideally, meaning they treat these principles, systems, or these guiding documents as the ideal thing, and then see what they could do to move towards that ideal, often resulting in misguided interventions. Yeah, so this is one of the other interesting things that we saw. Like even if you're one of the lead ML scientists shared that even if your model is unfair, it's doing better than if it's doing better than baselines for all cohorts, it might still be worth deploying, right? So these are some of the decisions that we ourselves, like as you graduate and move to the real world, you'll see doing all of this yourself, right? Even maybe even for some of the courses or assignments, you might still be doing some of these things, right? When you do this in the real world at large scale, there are lots of consequences for that, and that's what we studied, like what assumptions goes here and how to structure their own methodology for responsible learning. And some of their steps, some of the practitioners' activities, processes also reflect a diagnosing characteristic, meaning some practitioners shared that like they were not satisfied with the accuracy score or the precision score. They diagnosed the problem much deeper, understood what are the causal chain of actions that are taking place that leads to their model outcomes and so on. So those things also exist, but overall, the approach is very idealistic, meaning fixing something as fairness, or fixing something as good performance, and then modifying the model parameters or building a system such that it matches that ideal, right? So the reason why we introduced this theory is that, and this is not our theory, this exists in political science. We introduced these theories, we adapted that to this AI literature to let researchers and practitioners see that how AI is approached currently, to make them reflect on their own processes, to make them question about their own assumptions. Building on these insights, we also came up with a quick visualizer tool. Some of these things may sound so simple. For instance, if you want to make a system more robust to something, then you are taking several steps, right? You make sure that the data is clean, or the model performs well on certain metrics, and so on, right? But it ends there. It doesn't go forward, and we don't go deeper into like what assumptions we made to make a system robust. So here, what I'm showing here is, the picture is not so clear, I'm not sure, but I'll share the links of these tools, you can go and explore yourself. So we looked at another recent, it was back then, like it was 2024, so that paper was really, the paper by Kulkarni, I guess. So they published a paper to predict tuberculosis onset among individuals in global south, in India and other regions, based on participants' demographics and some of the health parameters. So this paper, while it kind of surprised many folks that how can someone predict TB based on these different characteristics. It was rapidly deployed in practice by the Indian government and different states, different countries that were working in partnership with the Indian government. The reason was that there was a deficit of doctors, there was a deficit of healthcare infrastructure. So they found this algorithm helping them faster, like make their process quicker and reportedly more efficient. But what they found in the paper was that they built an algorithm. They shared that these models predict TB better. These models because based on they came up with their own metric to show that how their model behaves better than many existing models. And they published this work in a very popular Machine Learning for Health conference. But if you look at the assumption that goes into this process, right? So we just took one value. So robustness is one ideal value that they wanted to adhere to, that they wanted to satisfy, and they operationalized that into several goals, like three different goals here. And then they took several interventions to address these things, address these robustness goals. And that intervention in turn had so many assumptions underneath. So all these unpacking of their decisions it's not common practice in AI or machine learning, right? So we often take the data, process it, clean it, build some models and deploy it and see what happens, right? So it's mostly reactive. So this framework came up based on this ideal non-ideal theoretical lens, and then we proposed this tool so that practitioners can look at their own decisions, interrogate, and see how they can improve their decisions by diagnosing their own assumptions to make the overall process more effective. The idea is that first we proposed practitioners we encourage them to diagnose the undesirable properties of data, that's where most of the imperfections start, and then see what they want to do with the data and what are the values that they want to achieve and what interventions they take and what are the known assumptions. So I'll come to this assumptions part in a bit. That's the focus of the second study. Because during the course of the study, we realized that assumptions are so easily, it's conceptualized in a very diverse way and taken for granted in many different ways. I'll come to that. It's the same graph that I showed before. So for instance, the advantage of coming up with these explicit mapping is that it helps us to understand the missing things in our path, right? So for instance, if the authors who performed this tuberculosis study, if they had access to some of these tools, then maybe they would have realized that there was one property that they did not address that in fact affected their own robustness goal, right? But they still went on to claim that their model is so robust across different settings, and that was even published and even implemented in practice. It's being used in real life to predict patients. It decides a patient's course of life in their course of action in their life, right? But still, it had so many assumptions. And so, especially when you graduate and when you start to use AI in practice for societally critical domains, it's important to invoke your own assumptions and see how reflective or unreflectively you carry out different paths. So. So the goal the contribution of this study was that, as we said, we proposed this framework to document the methodological assumptions, choices, and steps, and to systematize value alignment discussions. So this is another point that we observed was that in most of teams in practice, they include a product manager, someone from HR, someone from ethics team, and many folks from technical software development or so on. Software development practitioners don't care about, or at least don't tend to, from interviews, they didn't tend to care about all these ethical documents and stuff like that. Well, I'll show you some quotes about that. And ethics expert may not really appreciate the technical nuances that goes into this, right? So framework like these helps us to map out or chalk out the misunderstandings, understanding between these different stakeholders, which in turn helps us, to systematize these value alignment discussions. What do we mean by what value? What do we mean by robustness and so on? Maybe I'll finish the other one and then go back to questions if you have any. So we noticed during the course of this project that nobody talks about assumptions, right? Assumptions are everywhere, but nobody talks about that. So that became the focus of the next study. As you see in this slide, I just put a screenshot of several papers that talk about assumptions very loosely. Assumptions exist throughout the ML AI lifecycle, from data collection, from the conceiving of problem to the deployment and to the whole circle back, right? Oftentimes, many of these studies assign a marginal causal agency, meaning assumptions are often treated as something that causes some problem. Mostly it's problem, but sometimes mostly it's about like it has some agency that practitioners assign. You know, like for instance, some of these quotes here indicate that. Like, yeah. So if you look at the second one, they said like the authors say they assume that succinct answers were sufficient, indicating an undecided documentation process and so on, right? But what remains unclear, like, so throughout this process, what we found was that there's a lot of confusions about assumptions in AI. Like, how do they conceive and how do they channel through it? How do they work through it, right? So that became the focus of this. So we brought the discussion on assumption to center by through this philosophical work. Like there's a branch of philosophy called informal logic, which has not been a lot of like which like whose counterpart like formal logic is being very widely used in computer science and math. But informal logic is something that grew out of formal logic to address some of the shortcomings of formal logic in dealing with decontext, like in dealing with very context specific scenarios. So what we proposed was that assumptions are essentially premises, right? To a target or conclusion in an argument. So we can't see assumption as existing in vacuum. Like we can't see assumption something that exists independently. Instead, it exists as part of an argument, either implicit or explicit, right? And the final point is important note here. Like arguments are not necessarily localized to what practitioners do or write. In their documentation or report, it's so widespread that it could be anything that practitioners make, a decision that they could make. Right? Sorry. So, for instance, many practitioners, you know, like when they generate their own data, they kind of assume that okay, I'm generating. Maybe that's some of the this is also some of the common practice that we all do, right? So, so let's assume the data to be Gaussian, and then we move on from there, right? Or we just say that we sample this data from a Gaussian distribution and then we move on from there, right? But that's an assumption there. We think that a Gaussian distribution or a data of a specific distribution will lead us somewhere. So that process of making this whole assumption explicit is what this work intended to do. Sorry. So what I found was that there's a lot of confusion around how assumptions are conceptualized, and there's also confusion due to uncertainty about what is being done with assumptions. So I'll quickly go over a few things. So confusions in ontology, as in like ontology here stands for like what is assumption, right? So there's a lot of confusion around what assumption is among different practitioners. Some conceive that as an independent entity that exists, you know, like being outside of the ML workflow. Like for instance, like they see assumptions as axioms or requirements, such as like human behaviors can be observed and quantified. That's an assumption, right? So that precedes most of the work that computer scientists do. So that's a very vague assumption, like as in like very broad assumption, but we saw some of the specific assumptions in workflow as well. And in contrast, a relative construction of assumption means that assumption exists as part of the workflow. For instance, like people often say like data missingness assumption, right? So here assumption exists as part of the workflow, not as an independent entity. And the second part of the study was that most of the assumptions exist when most of the confusion over assumptions exists when dealing with them. Like for instance, like since there are no clear and accepted procedures to follow when an assumption is found, practitioners often adopt a reactive approach to identifying what assumptions are and how to handle them in practice. And yeah, so many like due to the nature of which many of these works are being done in AI, there's a tendency to quantify everything. And some practitioners tended, like they wanted to quantify the number of assumptions or how assumptions, like some of the characteristics of assumption, but that defeats the whole process. So assumptions inquiry needs to be more reflective, critical. It's predominantly qualitative, but there was some tendency among practitioners to quantify those aspects as well. that leads to more uncertainties and confusions. And I like this one the most, like it's like we call it circle of ambiguity. So like when assumptions are often invoked to mitigate some ambiguities in or some unresolved questions, ironically, due to their very own implicit nature, they raise several questions and concerns that they're trying to defeat in the first place. Like for instance, consider this use of automated risk assessment tools that many organizations use. Even Canadian government has a risk assessment suggestion for organizations adopting AI. It just says, answer these questions and make sure that your AI is going to be safe, right, when it's deployed. But a few practitioners shared that several sub-modules of these questionnaires or these risk assessment tools often require them to make assumptions, right? But there are typically no mechanisms to capture the evidence of these assumptions, like creating a loop. You need to answer some questions, you need to make some assumptions, but that assumptions doesn't have any check or validation. And this is again the final most important thing was that how to record the assumptions. It often goes by a list of things. Like practitioners often just go towards the end of their documentation sheets and just note down all the assumptions in list. But that's not really very reflective, right? So we can just note down assumptions, but is it going to be helpful, beneficial? Those are the questions that many people did not knew. And yeah, so I'll just quote one quote from a data scientist who said that when they use LLMs or language models, they go directly to model docs, data sets, and benchmarks, and treat the system cards or documentations. For instance, when an OpenAI releases a model, it releases a documentation. Like I'm not sure how many of you know that. We go to the tool and directly chat with the language model and see what's happening, but they often release their documentation saying that it's mostly publicly accessible for a variety of people of different backgrounds. It tells you how they train the system to some extent, not very openly, but it also says what assumptions goes in the system, how did they evaluate and so on. But there's a lot of implicit assumptions and judgments that went into this process that often is not scrutinized. So this data scientist said that they often go directly to the model cards, model docs, data sets, benchmarks, and treat these documentations or reports that accompany these language models as just terms and conditions, right? That's how many practitioners tend to do in practice, but it's exactly the processes that we wanted to surface up. And even while recording these assumptions, to what extent do they have to go? Do they have to write a paragraph about what the assumptions are about, how they came up with, or do they need to write it in some structured way no widely used tools or frameworks help us in doing that, right? So the granularity of this recording is a challenge in practice. So what we came up with was a simple conceptual tool. So look at this text at the top. So that's a questionnaire from a language model called PaLM2. It's a Google's language. It was 2-3 years before. Back then, that was one of the Google's most popular language model. So there's a question. At the end of the report, the model developers answered several questions to show that they built the model more responsibly. One of the questions was this: are there certain annotator perspectives or subgroups whose participation was prioritized? So the goal was to make sure that they hired annotators more inclusively. They valued diverse perspectives, and their response was just this: no, right? Which makes sense, their assumption is perhaps that they wanted to convey that they did not prefer one group over another, right? But you see the problem here, right? So it's unclear what assumption influenced their decision here. So what we came up with this was we came up with a framework to explain this assumption in a detailed way. So for instance, this could be used to either analyze someone's assumption, or you could use to analyze your own assumption. We're still in the process of making it more usable in practice, but the idea was that first we need to identify the target. The target is to perform inclusive hiring of annotators, and since different practitioners may come up with the same target through different paths, we introduce another variable which we call differentiator, meaning is your assumption because of the understanding of the target, is the assumption about appropriateness of the action that you've made to achieve a target, or is it about the address of the target itself, right? So for instance, what happens here is like a computationally oriented practitioner, let's say someone from engineering background, might think the assumption here in terms of algorithmic fairness and analyze how performing no action provides more fair hiring outcomes than like leveling up or down the fairness scores of something. So what I mean here is that there are several ways you could make sure the hiring of annotators is inclusive. One, maybe you assume that when no group is explicitly prioritized, hiring is inclusive. Or maybe you assume that the default state of the world has equal representation, so there's no need to prioritize. So each of these explicit articulation of assumption gives us several problems, right? So the first assumption here definitely shows us a lot of problem about the practitioner's mindset, like they think that the world is equal and so on. So the idea is to, like when explaining these assumptions in a detailed way, how can we encourage them to reflect on their own decisions and choices they make. So the takeaway was that assumption inquiry is a lateral thinking process that has to go in parallel to the development process of AI systems. Like it's not something that's done post hoc. Like once you build a system and then see, okay, let's think about the assumption that went to this process. It doesn't work that way. Like as you perform your actions and activities, like you need to think about the assumptions in practice. And this framework, like using assumption as a premise to an argument, helps practitioners to like navigate this situation. Yeah, so that was the idea here. So overall, like we studied, overlooked everyday practices of responsible AI, and we use these frameworks to understand what happens. And currently, we're trying to see how we could understand the reasoning-like behaviors of language models in the context of AI safety, like what assumptions they make about AI safety and so on. To understand like different biases exhibited by these systems and how they compare with human biases and so on. So that's the idea. So the takeaway is that as practitioners get into the world and work on real problems that affects, that has real social consequence, it's important to invoke your own assumption, invoke your own process, critically reflect on your own processes and see how they map the values that you want to achieve, right? And this work was made possible by different funds that we received. And feel free to scan the QR code or the link that has some of these frameworks, links to the frameworks. And so our labs are looking for undergraduate research assistants who wants to join us as thesis students or research assistants. So reach out if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Do you want to say that? Yes. This is something for you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Yes. This one does it. Okay. So we're gonna have one last draw. So again, we're gonna add it right here. Yeah. And here, if you add your names to this 19,
And we'll do award ceremony afterwards.
we'll add your name. And to.
Okay. While we wait for the names, we're gonna set up the awards prizes. And so first place will get to choose first, second place chooses second, and so it goes like that. We have a projector, a Fujifilm Instax Mini, and an Amazon Alexa Echo Dot as the prizes for the top 3 winners. Okay, I think we have everybody for the draw.
Does anyone need more time?
Oh, could you add my name manually, my phone died?
What is your name?
Mike.
Mike.
Thanks.
And, okay, let's see.
Okay, this one? Oh. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for everyone that submitted to the contest. Everyone has such great ideas, and I think the reason that we wanted to do freeform is everyone has different mediums that they're better in expressing their thoughts, emotions, whatever they think about. So you wanted to just give you the creativity and space to just do whatever you want. And I think there were some really impressive that we wanted those some cycle submissions, and we thought we would not get those.
Yeah, like we were unsure people who were reading the instructions would understand what freeform really meant and really push to the boundaries of what freeform allows you to do. And the fact that we got submissions actually of very diverse mediums is very interesting. Of course, there were writings, but there were also policy briefs, songs, photos, and art. And so all of those kind of related to an ethical issue in AI or something about AI's impact on society. And so it was really hard to judge and only pick 3, but we basically anonymized and looked at each one separate ranking. Each person had a different grading on the rubric, and then we averaged it to get the final score.
And we didn't know who sent the submission, and we asked someone to just clear the names.
So I know we usually go third to first, but because we're choosing the prizes in order, we are going to present the first place. Tiana Chan. Oh, you're here. Perfect. I don't know if we can share it, but we'll talk to you guys after about distributing it possibly. But Tiana wrote a song actually that represents the boundary between human and kind of machine, and produced it and wrote lyrics, and it was very well thought out.
Do you want to talk about it a little bit? Do you want to talk about it or no? You can talk about it a little bit if you want. I'm not prepared for this.
Sorry. Yeah, we don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Yeah, I just think the way AI impacts art is like it kind of varies from person to person, but I think a big thing that I've been thinking about, I think I went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I was really impressed by like, I don't know, I haven't been to a lot of art museums, but I think like going to an art museum and seeing like all this art that like just seems so like irreplaceable, like really made me think like, I think a lot of art cannot be replaced by, or can't be threatened by something like AI, because I think like so much art is like, I can't really explain it. You just have to go to an art museum. But I think something like optimistically that AI does for art is that it challenges artists to rethink like why they make art in the first place. And I think like if a lot of people are in it for like money or fame and like, or like, yeah, profit, I guess, something like AI, which is meant to be efficient and like mass produce and manufacture these polished pieces of work, might be a threat if that's like what you're going for. But I think if you make art for like expressing yourself and like really like for you, I think that is irreplaceable. So.
Choose your
Tiana, what did you use to make music?
Logic Pro X.
Oh, let's work together. You're a producer right there.
Logic,
You know,
logic.
producers are very rare. Wow.
I have not thought about this. Actually. Oh, these are the mini ones. Yeah. Like, oh, that's so cute. I'm like between these two because I want to watch movies. Actually, yeah, I'll take them.
Yay, Okay. Second place goes to The Ambient Algorithm by Sherry Wen. Oh, she left. Oh no.
Okay, just maybe give a quick like intro about what she submitted actually a photo piece. So maybe like again we'll contact her about like
She submitted a photograph of basically blue light and darkness and created a parallel between how the cold and blue light illuminates the darkness and the shadows, but made a parallel to how AI is kind of, and recommendation systems, it illuminates only highlighted features of what you want to see. And that kind of ties to one of the talks about how it's like it's not catered for diverse sources and maybe most trustworthy, but what to capture your attention most. And there was more detail to it, but we because we didn't tell the award winners who won before, we can't show them right now, which is unfortunate. But we'll post them on our website hopefully after.
And our third place award goes to
It actually goes to Ricardo. Ricardo submitted a really very good abstract research proposal or idea. Essay, yeah.
I mean, it draws from some experience that I had with geometry and physics, where basically diversity is interpreted as an imbalance between maybe forces or some other aspects of the system. And when I started working in AI, I saw a parallel. So what is usually called bias, I think it can be interpreted in this way. So as an imbalance between forces pulling towards different directions. And I mean, recently I got really interested in how, especially like texts coming from minority groups like indigenous people are actually treated in like in training AI systems, and how bad this is being handled. So I mean, I guess you should read the essay, but this is a kind of a condensation, and I swear that I didn't use AI to put all this thing together in a blender. It really comes from my interpretation of this problem. And I think it's kind of a thoughtful piece, and I hope I will be able to expand it further in the future.
Thank you so much.
I get this one. Okay.
We would take a photo on
you
the
want to
right
take a photo
side.
with the
Oh,
camera?
sure.
Okay, so for closing remarks is basically we want to say a huge thank you for showing up and for listening intently and for contributing with very thoughtful questions. And we just want to say this is the first time that we're hosting a conference and on AI ethics as well. And so we really appreciate your support and would love any feedback that you have for next year and for us, for anything you liked and you thought we could improve on. After post-conference, we will try to get the submissions released so everyone can view them. And we also have photos, if you noticed. Photographers and videographers are gonna make a recap video and you guys will probably be in it, especially if you asked questions and talked. And so, yeah, follow our Instagram. It's at Illuminate Academy and LinkedIn, and we post on Substack and Medium as well. So just trying to find the page where it has that. But yeah, stay connected with us and tag us on any posts that you have of the photos you took this weekend.
Maybe we can just give a sneak peek on what's to come after this event for us. We're going to be releasing 2 video interviews very soon. One with actually Bruce Schneider, that some of you had a chance to listen to yesterday, and one with Ryan Kell. Maybe some of you saw him at the networking room with his
The sand artwork.
artwork. I think they were both very interesting conversations. And we're gonna have our first magazine coming out on digital. Our blog writers have been working great. Our graphic designers and marketing team has been so great. So we're very excited for those, and please reach out.
Yeah,
Please
talk to
follow.
us if you want to join our team on making these initiatives happen. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am. It's too loud. That's good. That's good. Oh, should have taken a group photo.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing and inviting me.
Thank you.
Usually,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, really enjoyed it today. You did an amazing job organizing this.
Yeah, I really hope the lineup of speakers is
Yeah, no, really, yeah, there will be a third maybe
yeah.
next year or whatever.
We really like to see your article.
Yeah.
You can tell when something's like doing this.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Not for you to include like as a public. Thank you so much. It's not as noticeable when yeah, a lot of stuff I don't know and it's very confusing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that lately I've been reading a
It's
lot
good.
of, articles, and
I have a
hard
hard
time
time
to understand
with
whether, people just stuff in a blender and something came out, or yeah, there is an actual thought process behind it. So at least in this case, I really try to do my best to use, like,
Can you please say
for drama,
for the rest of your team?
flow, the conversation. But yeah, no, the idea is there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like how you introduce like this how new concepts
Yeah, there's actually a long story because last year I attended the Machine Society, something, sorry, I'm actually the organizer. And so there was this guy giving a presentation about generated models, and I was like pointing out that I think these models often have a problem like with symmetry. And it was, kind of more my personal experience. Picture of somebody in a mirror, looking at the mirror. It's a disaster. And so after that, I started thinking more and more about, the symmetry and language models or models. And I dealt with this actually used that in the essay that years ago. No, it's called the Digest GAN. It's generative AI for physics. And for that particular problem, we're dealing with symmetries like what you see escaping the ram left missing to the right, so there's a symmetry. But like the neural network is a hard language. It's generate only half and then use this kind of but your network was not learning. So I'm thinking about this problem for a very good time. Anyway, I'm glad that
Me too.
all right. Well, let's stay in touch.
So much, yeah.
All the best.
Should I unplug the computer?